Hello there. Today, I'd like to take you on an ASMR adventure into the history of some Christmas traditions. This is going to be my last video for 2019, so before I go away for my Christmas holiday, I thought it might be rather fun to make a cosy and light-hearted talk about some festive customs. The traditions I'm going to talk about are all specifically ones that I grew up with myself in the UK, and so depending on whereabouts in the world you're from, you might recognise these customs, or they might be entirely unknown to you. Either way, I hope you enjoy hearing about them, either as a way of celebrating something that's cosy and familiar to you, or perhaps as a means of learning something new about the jolly and sometimes downright eccentric customs that surround a British Christmas. As usual, there'll be a slideshow of images to accompany our talk, but there's no need for you to look at them if you don't want to. If you prefer, you can just close your eyes, relax, and let my voice guide you. So, welcome to the sparkling world of Christmas traditions. Tradition 1. Christmas cards. The exchange of gifts and tokens at Christmas goes back centuries and probably predates the Christian festival of Christmas itself, because many cultures around the world celebrate a festival of light around the time of mid-December. However, the current earliest known example of a specific Christmas greetings card dates from 1611. It was sent by a German physician called Michael Meyer to the English King James I, and it read, "A greeting on the birthday of the sacred King to the most worshipful and energetic Lord and most eminent James, King of Great Britain and Ireland and defender of the true faith, with a gesture of joyful celebration of the birthday of the Lord, in most joy and fortune we enter into the new auspicious year 1612. This rather wordy festive greeting implies that there was at least some custom of sending Christmas cards in Europe by the 17th century, although just a few decades after Michael Myers sent his Christmas card to the king, all festive traditions were temporarily repressed in England by the Puritans. Christmas cheer was restored after 1660 with the restoration of the monarchy under Charles II, but it seems that the idea of the Christmas card wasn't restored with it. There's no known tradition of sending Christmas cards in the 18th century, and the next card doesn't appear, in fact, till 1843. This was a design commissioned by Sir Henry Cole, a British civil servant who art lovers like myself tend to associate with the V&A Museum in London, because Cole was one of the founders of the museum. However, he was also instrumental in setting up a standardised postal service in the UK, which he did with the introduction of the uniform penny post, and this allowed people to send letters cheaply right across the country. Henry Cole wanted to publicise the benefits of this new, cheap, nationwide postal service, and so he commissioned the painter John Calcutt Horsley to create an illustration for a Christmas card that could be sold to people as a means of sending a quick festive greeting to a friend or to family. They all featured the same design that showed a large family raising their glasses in a festive toast, alongside a message that read, "A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to you." From this point onwards, the custom of posting Christmas cards developed, albeit slowly at first. One early advocate for Christmas cards was Queen Victoria, who began the tradition of sending an official royal Christmas card every year, and who also encouraged her children to make their own Christmas cards. However, it wasn't until the 1860s that the custom really began to take off, and it happened because enterprising publishers and stationers started to produce their own ranges of Christmas cards. Companies such as Goodall and Son and Raphael Tuck and Son began to print and sell their own Christmas card designs. And these designs are interesting to view through the perspective of a modern eye, because they don't always depict the traditional Christmas scenes and motifs that we're used to seeing nowadays. There were cards that featured robin redbreasts and snowy scenes, but there were also cards that featured bunches of spring-like flowers, or comic designs of frogs, insects, fairies, and even potatoes. The new trend for Christmas cards wasn't just happening in Great Britain. It was also taking off in Germany, where the Berlin publisher Wolf Hagelberg was producing his own range of specific Christmas cards from the 1860s onwards. Another German publisher, Louis Prang, emigrated to America, and he's credited with printing the first American Christmas card in the 1870s. By the 1900s, the custom of sending Christmas cards was firmly established, but the cards themselves were still largely postcards that only had a small space on one half of the back of the card for writing a Christmas greeting. It was another American, an enterprising Kentucky stationer called Joyce Hall, who decided to create a new format for Christmas cards in 1915. And he did this by selling folded cards, which had a design on the front, and then an entire double space on the inside of the fold for writing a Christmas message. This left far more space inside the card itself for writing, and the new style proved so popular that Joyce's brothers Rolly and William soon came on board to expand the family business. The resulting company, known originally as Hall Brothers and later as Hallmark, is of course still selling cards today. In the 21st century, many people are still sending Christmas cards to their friends and relations every year, although sales have begun to decline over the past decade with the arrival of online e-cards and social media greetings. These are gradually replacing more traditional posted cards, and I must confess, I myself don't send as many Christmas cards these days as I once did. There's perhaps something to be said for keeping your Christmas greetings digital in an age when many Christmas cards are laminated or foiled and so can't be easily recycled. Having said that, I must say I do still enjoy both sending and receiving Christmas cards through the post. Tearing open the envelope and reading a simple but heartfelt greeting from a distant friend or family member helps to make Christmas sparkle just that little bit more. Tradition 2. Kissing under the mistletoe. The cheeky custom of stealing a kiss under a bough of mistletoe at Christmas is actually much older than the tradition of Christmas itself. In ancient Rome, mistletoe was seen as a symbol of fertility, and boughs of it were brought into the house and hung over doorways during the festival of Saturnalia, which also took place in December and was dedicated to the god Saturn. Other ancient civilizations, including the Greeks, the Celts, and the Norse tribes of the north, also viewed mistletoe in the same light, as a plant that was symbolic of peace, protection, and fertility. Celtic priests and healers in particular considered mistletoe to be sacred, and it became an important part of their religious rituals. It's easy to see why they considered it to be such a miraculous plant, because mistletoe is a parasite, that appears to grow in the boughs of its host tree in an entirely self-contained way. And of course it also remains green and fruit-bearing all through the winter, even once the tree it's attached to has shed its leaves and is otherwise completely bare. So various rites were practiced around mistletoe, and sometimes elixirs were even made using it, which probably wasn't a good idea because, as we now know, mistletoe is in fact poisonous, and people have been known to actually die after eating the berries. Nevertheless, the early veneration of mistletoe and the celebration of it as a symbol of life and fertility in the otherwise bleak midwinter gave rise over time to the custom of hanging boughs of it inside the house, even after the religious rites that had been associated with that custom originally had disappeared. By the time the Christian Christmas tradition was flourishing, it had become usual for lovers to kiss under the mistletoe bough, and there was a specific tradition associated with this, that every time two people kissed beneath the mistletoe, a berry would be picked from the bough, and then once the berries had all gone, the kissing had to stop. However, by the 19th century, this rule had been relaxed somewhat, and a more free and easy custom had developed, which allowed a man to kiss any woman that he liked if he could catch her under the mistletoe. In time, this tradition crossed genders, so that women were equally free to kiss the man of their choosing beneath the mistletoe bough, and consequently, the custom became very popular indeed, and mistletoe became an almost ubiquitous Christmas decoration, especially during the Victorian era, when social etiquette otherwise forbade kissing in public under any other circumstances. Today, we don't have those social restrictions, of course, but even so, large bunches of mistletoe are still often hung up over doorways and in hallways, especially in hotels, bars, restaurants, and other commercial spaces where customers are encouraged to participate in the romance of this traditional Christmas custom. Tradition 3. Christmas crackers. The tradition of pulling Christmas crackers is found in various parts of the world. However, the tradition began in 19th century Britain, and there are still large parts of the world that celebrate Christmas and don't have Christmas crackers. So, if you haven't ever seen a Christmas cracker, let me explain to you what one is. It's part novelty and part Christmas table decoration, and it's basically made out of a tube of cardboard, which is wrapped in festive decorative paper and has a sort of tube handle at either end. When two people grasp the cracker by these handles and pull, it rips apart, and inside there's a cardboard snap which makes a loud cracking noise as the cracker is pulled, and which of course is responsible for giving Christmas crackers their name. The snap is made from a long, thin strip of cardboard that's covered in the middle with a tiny amount of silver fulminate, and that's an explosive chemical that makes a loud bang when it's activated. The act of pulling the cracker apart and ripping the cardboard strip effectively sets off this activation and makes that pleasingly loud crack sound. Inside the central cardboard tube, a Christmas cracker traditionally contains 3 gifts: a piece of paper bearing a joke or a conundrum, a festive paper party hat, usually in the shape of a crown, and a small surprise present, such as a tiny toy or puzzle. When the cracker is pulled apart, whoever is left holding the main cracker tube is traditionally the winner of the contents, although in practice, around most Christmas dinner tables, it's usually the youngest family members who end up with the spoils of all the crackers put together. In the UK, Christmas crackers are habitually used to decorate the dining table when Christmas dinner is served. They're usually pulled before the meal begins, so that the diners can wear their festive party hats while the meal is being served. There's also a ritual around the reading out of the riddles or jokes that are contained within the cracker. These jokes are invariably Christmas related and invariably really corny. One example would be, what do you get if you cross Santa Claus with a duck? A Christmas quacker. Another popular one is, what do you get if you cross a snowman with a vampire? Frostbite. Ha ha ha. The cheesiness of the cracker jokes is as much a part of the Christmas cracker tradition as the pulling of the cracker itself. The more terrible the jokes, the more British people seem to enjoy them. And a similar attitude also extends to the surprise gift, which is found inside the cracker. It's actually possible to buy luxury Christmas crackers that have very expensive surprise gifts inside them, but most British people actively embrace the tradition of cracker gifts being extremely cheap and rather ridiculous. And in fact, there are members of my own family who have been known to complain if the cracker gifts turn out to be too fancy or serious, because embracing the silliness of the Christmas cracker tradition is all part of the fun. Christmas crackers were invented by a Victorian sweetmaker called Tom Smith. In 1830, at the staggeringly tender age of just 7 years old, Tom started his first job working in a confectioner's shop in London, and by the time he was in his 20s, he'd opened his own sweet shop in London's Clerkenwell district. In 1846, he was visiting Paris when he came across the sweets known as French bonbons, and these were sugared almonds that were wrapped in a twist of decorative paper. Deciding to import the idea back to London, Tom started making and selling his own bonbons in his sweet shop, but he also added in a motto or a love message underneath the decorative wrapping in order to give each of his customers a small surprise when they opened the sweet. Sadly, his enterprise didn't initially pay off because the bonbons weren't that popular at first. But rather than giving up, Tom replaced the sweet with a small novelty gift, and the forerunner to the Christmas cracker was born. Then, in 1860, he had the brilliant idea of adding the silver fulminate snap to his novelty, and the size of the tube was increased in order to accommodate the snap, and marketed under the rather marvellous new name of Bangs of Expectation. However, the cracking sound provided by the snap soon led to the colloquial name of Christmas cracker being adopted, and that name has stuck ever since. Today, Christmas crackers are an essential part of the festive merriment for millions of families in Britain and across other parts of the world too. And I'd like to think that Tom Smith would have been proud of his legacy and his bangs of expectation. Tradition 4. Christmas pudding. All the different nations around the world that celebrate Christmas have some sort of delicacy or dessert that is associated with this particular time of year, and which is prepared especially to eat as part of a Christmas feast. In the UK, the most ubiquitous of these festive treats is the Christmas pudding, which is a round or dome-shaped sponge dessert that has quite a moist, dense texture and which is flavoured with lots of different spices and dried fruit. The origins of the Christmas pudding are disputed. Some food historians claim that it dates back as far as the medieval period, and it certainly has similar ingredients to the spiced and fruited porridges and pottages that were eaten at Christmas in the Middle Ages. However, as far as the pudding itself goes, the earliest recipe that exists for one comes from a book of recipes by Mary Kettleby. She was the author of a collection of above 300 receipts in cookery, physic and surgery that was first published in 1714 and which contains a short and fairly simple recipe for an excellent plum pudding. It reads, take 1 pound of suet, shred very small and sifted, 1 pound of raisins stoned, 4 spoonfuls of flour and 4 spoonfuls of sugar, 5 eggs but 3 whites. Beat the eggs with a little salt, tie it up close and boil it 4 hours at least. This recipe is not dissimilar to current day recipes for Christmas pudding, although everyone tends to have their own favourite version, and specific recipes are sometimes passed down through generations of a family. However, Christmas puddings today are still made by being boiled or steamed, either in a cloth, which produces a round-shaped pudding, or in a pudding basin, which produces a dome shape. Depending on the individual recipe, the pudding will also contain a variety of other dried fruits, including figs, apricots, apples, quinces, currants, oranges, and lemons. You'll notice that, in spite of the fact that Mary Kettleby's recipe refers to Christmas pudding as a plum pudding, plums don't actually feature in the list. This is because, before the 18th century, the term plum was also used to refer to raisins. So when people talk about plum pudding or plum porridge, they're actually talking about a dish made with raisins. Spices are also an essential part of any Christmas pudding recipe, and the most common ones used are cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon. There's also usually a hefty dose of alcohol in a Christmas pudding, and this was traditionally added to preserve the mixture so that the pudding could be made well in advance of the Christmas festivities. There are recipes that feature rum, whiskey, or even beer as a Christmas pudding preservative. However, brandy is the usual spirit that's used to douse the pudding, and then, just before it's served, an extra splash of brandy is often added over the top, which is then lit with a match so that the pudding can be brought to the table with an impressive corona of blue flames licking around it. There are also 2 rather quaint traditions associated with the actual making of a Christmas pudding. The first is that, while the batter is being mixed together, every member of the household takes a turn to stir the mixture while making a wish. The second tradition is that a silver sixpence is dropped into the pudding mixture while it's being stirred, and this means that when the pudding is eaten, one diner will find the sixpence in their portion. The coin is supposed to bring luck and wealth to whoever finds it, although if they discover it by biting down on the sixpence and cracking a tooth, an early trip to the dentist is a far more likely destiny. Tradition 5. The Christmas Tree. The decorating of a Christmas tree is perhaps the most recognizable and the most beloved of all Christmas traditions in the Western world. It's a custom that's said to date back to 16th century Germany, although interestingly, there's evidence of decorated trees being kept within dwellings in ancient Mesopotamia. Certainly the idea of the tree of life, which might be considered to be a precursor to the Christmas tree, is a concept that was found in many different ancient cultures and religions. However, the earliest examples of trees decorated especially for Christmas come from Germany, Estonia, and Latvia. By the 19th century, the Christmas tree was a key part of Germanic Christmas celebrations, and there's a popular myth that it was Queen Victoria's German husband, Prince Albert, who introduced the Christmas tree to the UK. However, this isn't actually true. Although the first Christmas tree in Great Britain did actually have royal origins, it was introduced not by Prince Albert, but by Queen Charlotte, who was the grandmother of Queen Victoria and the wife of George III. She was also German-born, and there's a record of her including a decorated Christmas tree in a party that she gave for children in 1800. So she was the first royal to bring the Christmas tree to Britain. But nevertheless, Prince Albert and Queen Victoria certainly helped to popularise the tradition. They had a tree every year, and it was always decorated with wax candles, glass ornaments, paper decorations, and novelties made out of sugar, such as stripy candy canes. Today, many of these decorations still feature on Christmas trees, although the wax candles have usually been replaced with electric lights, which tend to be somewhat safer. Also today, most Christmas trees tend to be artificial, rather than being actual living trees that have been cut down for the purpose. I can see the value of having an artificial tree that you take out year after year, but for me personally, I like to have a real Christmas tree in the house. There's a wonderful excitement associated with going to pick your tree from the Christmas tree stall, choosing that fir tree that is just right for your home, and then bringing it back to decorate. I know many people complain about the needles that drop off a real tree, but for me there's no substitute for that living green and for that wonderful, fresh smell of pine resin that accompanies a real tree. Like many traditional Christmas associations in Great Britain, the custom of the Christmas tree was written about and further popularised by the Victorian writer Charles Dickens. Through his Christmas books, such as A Christmas Carol and The Chimes and The Cricket on the Hearth, he did a great deal to establish the ideas that surround what is now thought of as a traditional British Christmas. So I'd like to end this talk with a short extract from a piece that Dickens wrote in 1850. This describes the many wonders of a mid-Victorian tree, and it's simply called A Christmas Tree. I have been looking on this evening at a merry company of children assembled round that pretty German toy, a Christmas tree. The tree was planted in the middle of a great round table, and towered high above their heads. It was brilliantly lighted by a multitude of little tapers, and everywhere sparkled and glittered with bright objects. There were rosy-cheeked dolls hiding behind the green leaves, and there were real watches, with movable hands at least, and an endless capacity of being wound up, dangling from innumerable twigs. There were French-polished tables, chairs, bedsteads, wardrobes, 8-day clocks, and various other articles of domestic furniture wonderfully made in tin at Wolverhampton, perched among the boughs as if in preparation for some fairy housekeeping. There were jolly, broad-faced little men, much more agreeable in appearance than many real men, and no wonder, for their heads took off, and showed them to be full of sugar plums. There were fiddles and drums. There were tambourines, books, work boxes, paint boxes, sweetmeat boxes, peep show boxes, and all kinds of boxes. There were trinkets for the elder girls, far brighter than any grown-up gold and jewels. There were baskets and pincushions in all devices. There were guns, swords, and banners. There were witches standing in enchanted rings of pasteboard to tell fortunes. There were teetotums, humming tops, needle cases, pen wipers, smelling bottles, conversation cards, bouquet holders, real fruit made artificially dazzling with gold leaf, imitation apples, pears, and walnuts crammed with surprises. In short, as a pretty child before me delightedly whispered to another pretty child, her bosom friend, there was everything and more. That sumptuous description of a Victorian Christmas tree brings this talk on Christmas traditions to a close, and I do hope you've enjoyed sharing these charming Christmas customs with me. I hope too that you can join me again soon, in 2020, for another ASMR adventure. Until then, I'd like to wish you a warm, safe, happy and magical Christmas, and a new year full of wonder and enchantment. Thank you so much for your company. Goodbye.